morning. My name is David. I'm one of the worship leaders here. Welcome to the Vineyard. Come, let us sing for joy. Let us shout aloud to our King. Come, let us worship God, lifting holy hands. Bless His name. Lord, we come to meet with you again, to worship with one voice in adoration. You deserve our every praise that echoes in this place. You are the worthy one. Come, let us sing for joy. Let us shout aloud to our King. Come, let us worship God, lifting holy hands. Bless His name. Lord, we come with gratitude that flows from deep within our souls. We rejoice in you, and we will glory in your name. We will shout, our lips proclaim. Praise is stirring in our hearts. Come, let us sing for joy. Let us shout aloud to our King. Come, let us worship God, lifting holy hands. Bless His name. Every creature, heaven and earth below, bless His name, bless His name. Every creature in heaven and earth below, bless His name, bless His name. Every creature in heaven and earth below, bless His name, bless His name. Every creature in heaven and earth below, bless His name, bless His name. Come, let us sing for joy. Let us shout aloud to our King. Come, let us worship God, lifting holy hands. Bless His name. Amen. Why don't you turn around and say hi to someone you've been worshiping with?
people can't. But it's all good because it's a potluck. But no, we're doing a worship circle, and as part of that, there's going to be just some training in how to hear God's voice and how to discern what God's saying. So there's a training component as well. There's no childcare, but if your kids are old enough to participate, we encourage you to bring them. There's also a men's breakfast coming up the following week. And our NAMI Connection class is starting up. I think they started this week. Every other week, there's a class from the National Alliance of Mental Illness for folks and family and friends who are dealing with any mental illness at all. That meets every other week here. But there's more info in the bulletin, and you can check that out. But on this topic of hearing God's voice and the ministry of the Holy Spirit, if that's something you've wondered about, and you've wondered, you hear people say, God spoke to me this such and such, and or I believe God was leading me. If you've wondered what that's about, I also invite you to come on Sundays at 9 a.m. We gather here, actually out in the foyer now, in a circle, in a participatory, collaborative time, a worship circle, and we prepare the morning by celebrating the Lord's Supper and a time of prayer together. And as part of that, we make space to listen for God to speak to us and ask Him for promptings. And, this mystified me for the longest time growing up in church. I thought, God never speaks to me. But what I discovered is that God is speaking all the time to us. The trick is figuring out when it's Him and when it's just some crazy random thought I'm having. When it's God and when it's just what I ate for dinner last night. Too much pizza, clearly. That's the trick. And so we're going to work on that this Friday at Fire by Night, but we also work on that every Sunday morning at 9. And there's a few of the words from that I just want to share as we get moving this morning. Because this may be you, this may be an invitation to you today. Somebody here just feeling like your faith is just shattered. Your faith is shattered and needs to be put back together. Or you're feeling like, I'm just about to give up. Somebody just had this picture, a couple of people, she has a picture of like somebody trying to start a lawnmower and like it's that thing where it's like it won't start and it seems to get harder every time you pull it. You know what I mean? And we can feel that way in life. And if that's you, a couple of our prayer team people just said, I see like God wants to fix that. You maybe need some starter fluid to press the analogy. And last but not least, if there's just something in your life you're struggling with. It might be procrastination, or just something you've not revealed to anybody else, just something you've kept to yourself. There's an invitation in a service like this just to come up, to receive prayer at the end and to share that with somebody else. So all those things are just invitations to you, we believe, from the Spirit this morning. But before we get any further, let's go ahead. Let's stand for the reading of God's Word. as we reach this chapter of our study of 1 Corinthians on marriage and singleness and all that involves, it's the week of Valentine's Day, so that's convenient. But as you'd think we planned it that way, but we didn't. You know, as we turn to 1 Corinthians, I need to give you a heads up again this week, because this text that we just read, like so much of the Bible, isn't simply a manual for life. And you may have noticed that as you read it. You think, you know, the Bible we do believe is the Word of God given to us, but that doesn't mean it's simple to read or understand, not always. And in fact, if you like simple, the Bible is liable to be frustrating to you. And I say this because there's some of us that have read the Bible and we just want to quit. Like we don't know how does that even fit into our lives? And there's others who've read the Bible and they've decided they know exactly what it already means, and so they've stopped wrestling with all the ways that it challenges us. And this dilemma comes up in chapter 7, right in the first sentence. Now, for the matters you wrote about, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. And you know, sometimes people say, you know, we just need to accept the plain meaning of the Bible. The Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it, end of story. But right here in the first sentence, we find out that the Bible is much more complicated than just that. I mean, here we're listening in on an ancient conversation, an ancient pastor, an ancient church, and we only get one side of that conversation. Now, have you ever been on one side of a conversation? Sometimes my wife is on the phone and she's talking to somebody. I think she's ordering pizza, but it turns out, you know, she's I'm not invited. She's going out for the night for pizza, and I thought we were going to enjoy pizza. I mean, when you get one side of the conversation, you have to fill in the blanks. What else is going on? Now, for the matters you wrote about, Paul says. So what are the matters they wrote about? I mean, we don't know exactly. But regarding that topic, Paul says it's good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. And here's the dilemma. Is the Bible telling us simply and plainly it's better not to have sex? I mean, you heard it here, folks. Better not to have sex. Is that what the Bible's saying? Thank you. Because I asked that question because many a Puritan has read it that way. Many a Puritan has understood it that way. Sex is a necessary evil. And that's, you know, that is not how most scholars see it, at least today, which is why if you've got the NIV version of the Bible, that phrase is actually put in quotes. You put it back up there. It's not good for a man to be with a woman. But what most scholars would say is actually Paul here is quoting the Corinthians. That's what they've written about. They've said, hey, you know, we've heard it's good for a man not to have relations with a woman. And Paul is quoting them and then responding to that. But don't tell that to a Puritan. Because to a Puritan, it's pretty simple. It's good for a man, you know, plain and simple. It's good for a man not to have sex. Now, I don't know if you're aware, but they actually have Puritan Valentine's Day cards. Have you seen these? Would you be my necessary vessel of procreation? I love this one. I need you to help raise livestock and crops, or surely we'll start. The romance there. I need you. Being with you fills me with impure thoughts, and I am ashamed. I thought to write you a love poem. For that thought I have beaten myself with a rough branch each night hence. Roses are red, violets are blue, and neither are useful or necessary at all. You almost make my heart dance, and it is forbidden. Happy Valentine's Day. Let us never speak of this again. All of which brings us back to 1 Corinthians 7. Because best we can tell, what's happening in the church in Corinth is Corinth, this new church, has some Puritans among them. And scholars call it the pro-celibacy faction. Now, you might wonder, like, why is anybody so excited about celibacy as to join a faction? But Corinth, as I've been saying the last few weeks, it was in the ancient world something of a sin city. A city filled with every sort of debauchery and depravity and every sort of dark and twisted version of sexuality you can imagine. And so as people begin entering into new life with Jesus in this church, many people are wondering, should we just leave sex behind, like, altogether with our old lives? I mean, just leave it behind? Maybe it's just better to be done with sex. I mean, they're wondering questions like, should I even get married? I mean, marriage seems like a mess. And after all, Paul, I mean, you're not married, and Jesus wasn't married. I mean, but what if we're already married? What if I'm already married? Should we live like we're not married? Separate beds? Should we be like celibate roommates? People are asking, what if I've never been married? Should I even get married? Is that the ideal? What's the better option? I mean, are sex and Christianity even compatible? To us, those might seem like odd questions because we know that the Bible is positive about marriage. We know, most of us have heard that the Bible celebrates sexuality as a gift from God. I mean, the Bible includes a whole book of erotic poetry. Don't tell the teenagers. So where did the Corinthians ever get this idea about sexuality? Well, they didn't get it from Paul, and they didn't get it from Jesus. I mean, they certainly didn't get it from Judaism. They got this idea from something called Gnosticism. Have you heard of Gnosticism? I mean, it kind of sounds like a religion, but it wasn't a religion. Gnosticism was more like a fuzzy philosophy of life, one of the many kind of thoughts about life that just blew through the air in the culture in ancient Corinth. And Gnosticism, you've maybe heard people say things like, I'm not into organized religion, but I'm very spiritual. You hear that? I mean, that's Gnosticism was a little like that. And Gnosticism saw the world in two separate, dualist sort of a divide in the world between the spiritual world, which is pure and good, and the physical world, which is dark and corrupt. I mean, Gnosticism suggested that the whole world is corrupt, and the physical world and our physical bodies are falling apart. They're depraved and despicable. I mean, you'd just be better off if you could get rid of this old body. I mean, better off if you could just evacuate this filthy world. Because the spiritual world is where it's at. Like, that's where the goodness is. The spiritual world is pure and untainted. And to be spiritual, you need to get free of these stinking earthly desires that trip you up. I bring up this phenomenon, this sort of life philosophy, because Gnosticism is still alive and well in the world today. I mean, a lot of Eastern religions contain the same sort of dualist theme of spiritual good, but earthly, ooh. And the Eastern-inspired mindfulness movement promotes a similar idea called detachment. That the path to wholeness and freedom in your life is just not getting too attached to earthly things. And many Christians live as well with just kind of a low-grade suspicion that there's something inherently bad about their physical bodies. Just something inherently sinful about flesh. I mean, even if they don't say it, sometimes Christians assume their physical bodies are basically their biggest problem in life. Like, their biggest problem in their Christian life is this body, especially when it comes to sex. And if you ever thought to yourself, my big problem as a Christian is that I just have too strong a desire and passion and sex drive, well, you've probably been infected by a little bit of Gnosticism. And I've actually heard people say things like that. If I could just get rid of this dirty skin suit and fly away, oh glory, to heaven, at last I'll be free of the sinful trap, free of lust, free of shame. But on Valentine's weekend, you need to know that that's not a Christian idea. It's not a Christian idea. Because Christianity celebrates the physical world in all its messy and earthly and human, messy reality. I mean, because this is the real big deal. Christianity celebrates the humanity, the physical world, because we believe that in Jesus, God has permanently fused himself to humanity. Flesh and blood, bread and wine. God loves humanity so much that he became human forever. He meets us in the physical realm, not just once, but will so forever. As Christians, we also believe that God not only loves humanity, but he loves a relationship. No, it's more accurate to say he is relationship. It's in Christian thought, there is not simply a God. There's Trinity. God is Trinity, Father, Son, and Spirit. God in himself is an eternal relationship. And that's why we say that God is love. He doesn't just love us. God is love. Because the most true thing about God is God's relationship among themselves, which sounds odd to say. Now, I don't know about you, but I always, the doctrine of Trinity, it seemed a little odd, hard to comprehend. Maybe, if I'm honest, sometimes wondered if it's even a helpful doctrine. But I think it's one of the most helpful ideas in the Christian faith, because if a Trinitarian, if a relational God created the universe, it just explains so much. It explains why, a man would walk 500 miles and walk 500 more just to be with, it explains these things. It explains them. Don't make me sing it. Because the universe, according to Christianity, is built on love. That's the most fundamentally true thing about our world, is love and our desire for it, because that is what God is like. That is who he is. But let's get back to 1 Corinthians. Because here Paul is dealing with everyday questions about relationships. Should I marry? What about sex? Should I stay married? Should I stay single? And he says, for the matters you wrote about, it's good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman, but since sexual immorality is occurring, each man should have sexual relations with his own wife, and each woman with her own husband. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. And a few verses later, he says, I say this all as a concession, not a command. I wish that all of you were as I am, single. But each of you has your own gift from God. One has this gift, another has that. Now, I say this to you as a concession, not a command. Did you notice that? Here again, the Bible can be a little frustrating if you like it simple. Because some of us have been taught to expect that the Bible gives us just, hard and fast answers to all our questions. The Bible tells us what to do, and we simply obey. But here the Bible does something different, really different. Paul lays out here what he thinks are the ideal, preferred options. Verse 8, now to the unmarried and the widows I say, it's good for them to stay unmarried, as I do. But if they cannot control themselves, they should marry, for it's better to marry than to burn with passion. So which is it, Paul? Which is it God is telling me to do? What should I obey? What is it the Bible is teaching? And again, verse 10, he says again, to the married, I give this command, not I, but the Lord. A wife must not separate from her husband. But if she does, she must remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband. And a husband must not divorce his wife. To the rest I say, now I, not the Lord, if any brother has a wife who is not a believer and she's willing to live with him, he must not divorce her. But if the unbeliever leaves, well, let it be so. It's strange. Paul makes concessions and not commands. He takes into account extenuating circumstances. He admits that sometimes he's not even speaking a word he thinks is from God. He's just giving his own opinion. That's strange, isn't it? And you may wonder, wouldn't the Bible be a lot easier if it just simply told us what to do in every situation? Wouldn't it be easier if there's just one right way to do everything? But that's not how life works, is it? Life is full of complexities, extenuating circumstances, ambiguities, uncertainties, gray areas. And, divorce is one of those areas. I'm not sure if you've noticed, but the New Testament teaching on divorce leaves so much room for ambiguity and complexity. I mean, the New Testament teaching on divorce basically comes down to this passage and then Jesus' words in Matthew 19. And you can basically sum up what the New Testament says about divorce in a sentence or two. Something like this: divorce is never the best option, but sometimes it's the least bad of all available options. I mean, divorce, sometimes it's the only way to prevent more bad from happening. I mean, it just leaves so much uncertainty. And it doesn't really answer all of our questions, does it? I mean, what about this? What about then? What about her? What about him? But friends, that's one of the things I actually love best about the Bible. That the Bible doesn't pretend that life is simpler than it really is. The Bible doesn't pretend there's always one simple answer for every moral quandary. Instead, the Bible does something I believe is far greater than quick fixes or simple morality. The Bible offers us an invitation to an entirely different way of life. The Bible opens our eyes to an entirely different story about the world and what's happening. I mean, the Bible isn't simply a manual on right and wrong. It's a revelation. The Bible isn't simply a black and white checklist to do and not do. It's a grand story that opens our eyes to a different way of living, a different path, a different way through life that leads us straight to the Creator. And I was trying to think about how to title this sermon this week and how to summarize what Paul's saying, because he just touches on all kinds of things. And sometimes he says, this is me talking. I think this is God, but no, this is just me, and you could do it this way, but, I'd prefer you do it that way. But if you can't, well, behind chapter 7 are principles and it's just core assumptions that Paul has. And I think what chapter 7 really could be summarized as is the way to live happily ever after, according to Paul. The way to live happily ever after, because that's what we all want, right? The storybook ending. The way to live happily ever after. Because behind Paul's tips and suggestions and advice and concessions and confessions about the complexity of it, there's a man with a totally different vision for how life works. Paul has a totally different vision of how we live happily ever after than the story that most modern Americans would live in. He has a totally different dream than the American dream, a totally different understanding about what God is up to in the world than many religious folks. And the thing that really jumps out in this passage first to me is just that Paul didn't think marriage was a very big deal. Did you notice that? Like, he doesn't even think getting married should be a huge priority. It wasn't for him. And for those of you who are single, which is about half of us here, perhaps it shouldn't be that big a priority for you either. I mean, Paul would say, I'd prefer if it was that way. He says, now to the unmarried, I have no command from the Lord, but I give a judgment as one who by the Lord's mercy is trustworthy. Because of the present crisis, I think that it's good for a man to remain as he is. And what's the present crisis? Well, scholars say it comes up a few verses later when he says, this world is passing away in its present form. Because of the present crisis, I think it's good for a man to remain as he is. So if you're pledged to a woman, well, don't seek to be released. But are you free from such a commitment? Well, don't look for a wife. But if you do marry, you've not sinned. And if a virgin marries, she has not sinned. But those who marry will face many troubles in this life, indeed. And I want to spare you this. I mean, Paul would say, you want to live happily ever after. Well, recognize that singleness has big advantages. It's odd, isn't it? I mean, because for a lot of Protestant Christians, a lot of evangelical Christians, this is shocking news. I mean, evangelical churches have a bad reputation for excluding single people. I mean, some denominations, sure, have celibate nuns and priests, but not in most churches like this one. In some churches and denominations, it's actually well known that they would never hire a single person as pastor. I mean, single people in many churches are ineligible for ministry roles. They were looked at least as second class or sort of incomplete, which is odd because it means that there are actually some churches at which Jesus and Paul would not qualify for a ministry job. Like that's odd, isn't it? Like when you've excluded Jesus from a role at the church, like something doesn't add up. But Paul here says, singleness is a gift, and so can marriage. It's just not my gift, but singleness is a gift, and you probably need to hear that if you're single, that life is not about marriage. It's just not. Now, according to Paul, marriage is not even the Christian ideal. It's a concession. A concession. Now, by far, Paul thought the greater Christian calling is to a life of undivided devotion to God, he says. Undivided devotion to God. And have you thought about that as a single person? Like a friend of mine a few years back said that her church had talked about this and asked the married folks in the church just to consider what that would mean for them. Like if you really believed that it was a gift some were given to just have undivided devotion to God, no concern about household affairs and marriage and kids, but they had this opportunity to be solely devoted to God. Well, you'd probably insist they come and occupy your in-law apartment or something. You'd insist, let me help provide for you so you can do this. And she said, after our church talked about this, the church opened up people in the church opened their home to me, and they said, you know what? We see gifts in you. We don't think that your highest calling is just to figure out how to manage to pay all your bills yourself as a single person and cook for a party of one every night. Like, that doesn't make sense. And that's not the world Paul lived in. You may not know it, but as we talk about the healthcare crisis in this country and debate back and forth, what's wrong and what we should do about it, you may not know it, but by far the biggest non-government provider of healthcare, not just here, around the world, is the Catholic Church. In the U.S., 1/6 of every hospital beds is run by the nuns. 1/6. Well, not just the nuns anymore, because since the 1960s, the amount of nuns in America has dropped by 80%. The 60s was sort of a peak. And most of them are over 80 years old now. And people just, aren't signing up for that sort of life anymore, at least not in America. Now, around the world, it's a different story. But in the U.S., the Catholic Church has done a lot of investigating on why this is. And at least one of the reasons is that younger generations, they've concluded, just don't see that as a very fulfilling way of life. Like, there's just not a lot for me in that. That's not gratifying to me. And that's what it really comes down to, I think, in so many of these decisions Paul's talking about. Self-fulfillment, self-gratification, pleasure. I mean, that's what we live for in this country, isn't it? The pursuit of happiness. I mean, it's just encoded in our DNA. And you may have also heard that the divorce rate today, is on the decline, which seems like a good thing. But sociologists are saying it's largely because millennials are not getting married as often. Younger generations are not choosing marriage like older generations did. So there's no marriage to dissolve. I mean, younger people are just recognizing that marriage isn't the preferred path to fulfillment, which honestly is probably just as well, because marriage is not a straight path to self-fulfillment. It's just not a straight path. As a pastor, I've talked to a lot of couples about marriage, about their marriage challenges, and almost every one of them tells a story that's very similar. When we met, we were so in love. He was Mr. Right. She was my everything. It seemed like he or she was everything I could ever want. Like he could fulfill my dreams. like she could give me everything I ever wanted in life. But then, a few years passed, or even a few decades, and I've realized this isn't the dream come true I thought it was. And in fact, it's become a living nightmare, couples in crisis will say. I'm not happy anymore. Everything she does just grates me and annoys me and frustrates me. Or he just doesn't fulfill me. Her worst traits they're just ruining my life. Maybe we weren't meant to be. Maybe we're not a good fit. Maybe we got married too young. I've got to think about my needs now, my happiness. It's me first. And here's the problem. You want to live happily ever after, and Paul would say, recognize that the purpose of marriage is to kill you so you can get your life back. To kill you so you can get your life back. They don't tell you that very much in premarriage counseling, do they? That's because there's a churchier way to say it than that. We could say Christoformity, to be formed into Christ, which is really about dying so you can get your life back. And according to the Bible, for each of us, our biggest problem in life is not her or him or they. It's right here. It's us. It's our sin. It's our sin that keeps us stuck. And it's killing us, the Bible would say. Paul would say, our self-centeredness, it's actually killing us. And if it's left to its own, our selfishness will destroy everything else we hold dear and love in life. That is sin. And nowhere does it show up quite like marriage. Nowhere can we see the power of sin to destroy a person more than marriage. Because with most people, we can hide our true selves, right? We can come to church and we can, for a couple short hours, we can hold it together. Or we go to work and we can turn it on for a couple hours. But when we go home, our spouse gets to see who we really are, what we're really made of, what's in us. And after the dating phase is over, all of us begin at one point or another to see that we're married to a human being with flaws, with sin, with darkness in them. And we get to choose. Do I put my life first? Or do I put this other person first? When the wedding dress is tucked away, do I give my life for them? Or do I put my life first? Do I make this about my choices and my happiness, or do I lay down my happiness for another? Because love, according to the Bible, according to the way and the story of Jesus, love is not what our culture thinks it is. Love is laying down your life for the good of another. Love is laying down your life, losing it for someone else. And I've been married almost 2 decades, like 19 years to be exact. Thank you. I should get a ribbon. And I wouldn't trade it for the world. I wouldn't. It's been God's greatest gift to me. But I've had to lay down my life to get to the point where I'd say it's a gift. My first big act of losing my life was when my wife wanted to get a cat. And, I wasn't a cat person. And, that was who I was, a not cat person. And, I had to decide, is this about me or not? It seems simple, but honestly, it was like an existential crisis for me. I cannot have a cat. And then it came I cannot move to another town. And it just went up from there. And over 20 years, we've had some excruciating moments. Some moments where I had to decide, and she had to decide, do I really want to be married to somebody if it costs me something more than just my personal preferences for animals? Do I really want to be married to someone if it hurts? Do I really want to sign up for richer or poorer in sickness and in health? What if it's mental health? Do I want to sign up for that? Do I want to sign up for it if it hurts, if it's costly, if it's painful? And friends, my marriage has brought me more joy than any other relationship in life, but it's also brought more sorrow. My marriage brings more happiness into my life than any relationship, and here's why. Because it's put to death the worst parts of me. It's put them to death. It's impaled my selfishness. It's stretched my patience past the breaking point. It's forced me to decide whether to give up my life for the good of another. And it's all been worth it. You need to know that. It's all been worth it. But it is really hard to stay the course in singleness or in marriage. It's really hard to stay the course as a married person unless you catch a glimpse of this world as Paul sees it. Like, unless you see what Paul sees, it's really hard to let marriage drive out the darkest parts of you, to lay your life down, to lose your life, to find it. The way Paul saw the world, all of his advice hinges on this. Verse 29, what I mean, brothers and sisters, is that the time is short. From now on, those who have wives should live as if they did not, those who mourn as if they did not, those who are happy as if they were not, those who buy something as if it were not theirs to keep, those who use the things of this world as if not engrossed in them. For this world in its present form is passing away. And Paul would say, you want life happily ever after. We need to recognize that this life isn't everything. It's not everything. And you see, for Paul, you don't only get to live once. For Paul, you can live twice. And if you want to live happily ever after, you've got to think about the actual, literal ever after. You've got to think about your next life. For this world in its present form is passing away. But that's not Gnosticism. That's not detachment. That's not the suggestion that we shouldn't really care about anything in this present or enjoy anything in the physical world. That's not Gnosticism. It's not escape to an immaterial world of angels and harps and unimaginable things. Paul says this world in its present form is passing away, but the physical universe isn't going away. What you believe, the physical universe isn't going away. In fact, Jesus taught us to pray, let your kingdom come, your will be done on earth here as it is in heaven. The decided direction of heaven in the Bible is downward, down to earth. A new heavens and a new earth is the hope of the Bible, not an escape to some unimaginable realm, but heaven come to earth at last. The hope of Paul is resurrection, physical resurrection. And what you believe and what you decide to believe about life and life after death in this life, what you decide to believe about that actually changes how you live in the present. When I was younger, I thought that heaven, according to the Bible, was some sort of like dream world, like an unimaginable place, of all my consumer fantasies finally come true. I thought it was a place where we'd be free of this old physical, contraption we live in. We'd be free at last, like free spirits in the sky somewhere or something, or who knows where. But, it's no wonder people aren't that excited about that. It's no wonder that, when you hear about the endless worship times in the sky, like no one's that excited about that. And it's no wonder that people, even Christians, many are just afraid to die, afraid to get older. Because what you believe about life after death actually changes how you live now. What the Bible teaches about heaven is not that we will escape to somewhere else, but that heaven will at last come to earth. And the earth, God's creation, will be remade and restored and renewed. And if you believe that, as Paul did, it just changes everything. The people that saw Jesus in the flesh, that saw somebody come back from death, it just changed things. Because they believed that if Jesus could come back from death, well, that meant anything was possible. Like anything could come back from death. Like marriages could come back from death. The sick could come back from death. The chains of poverty could be broken. Mental illness could be healed. The people that saw Jesus come back from the grave, heaven could come to earth at any moment. And that changes things. If you believe that all the things you love best and most in this life, love and relationships and sunsets and long walks on the beach and meals with friends and good food and good wine and laughter and love, if you believe that all we love in life is not destined to disappear, but to be remade whole, just as it was always intended to be, resurrected at last in God's new world, well, you don't have to live with obsessive worry and anxiety about losing it all. You don't have to chase, greener pastures. You don't have to live with an obsession about having it all now when you believe you're going to have it all again next time. You can learn to lay down your life for others, whether that's as a married person, whether that's as a single person, just wholly devoted. You can learn to give your life for others if you believe that this life isn't your only shot at personal happiness and fulfillment. So let's ask God now to come and be present with us in this time of singing. Singing is like a time of meditation and prayer, where we just repeat some of the same lines over and over again, just making space for God to come and reshape us, to reshape our desires, to fill us with hope that this life isn't all there is, to fill us with hope that this world can be remade even now in small ways, anytime, here and there. Just faith can let the new kingdom come, just burst into earth. Let's stand now and ask God to do that as we worship.